It's good to have you back. A quick recap of what we have done so far. We've talked about, the last topic we treated was Christian missionary activities in West Africa. And we looked at establishment of Christian churches in Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia. Now, we're looking at another topic, which is known as the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade is different from the trans-Saharan trade. The trans-Saharan trade was a legitimate trade. The transatlantic slave trade was an illegitimate trade. Now, transatlantic trade, let's look at it. It says that Atlantic slave trade began in 1442 when African captives from the Senegal River were taken to the port of Lagos in southern Portugal and sold as slaves. They were sold as slaves. So, let's read this other paragraph. It said, the Atlantic slave trade was a significant part of the historical experience of West African peoples throughout this period. It influenced political change, religious practice, farm production, and other aspects of daily life. It was also a main cause of the growing European presence in West Africa, and it influenced the global connections which many West African rulers developed over the course of these 4 centuries. So, the transatlantic slave trade started in the 15th century and ended in the 19th century. Take note. So, it was the transatlantic slave trade that brought the Europeans with their African rulers. Take note of this. All right, let's go to the next slide. Most areas of West African and West Central Africa were influenced by the Atlantic slave trade in this period. That means slaves were captured in West Africa and transported via the transatlantic ocean to Europe, the Caribbean, and Americas. Please take note of this. Slaves were captured in West Africa and transported via the transatlantic ocean to America, Europe, and the Caribbean. That is why we call it the transatlantic trade, transatlantic slave trade. It was an illegal trade. It was around the 18th century that people started clamoring for the abolition of the slave trade. Let's go. Okay. Influenced by the Atlantic slave trade. In this period as well as what is now Mozambique, there were many different phases of the Atlantic slave trade. Some of the most important dates were the following. Take note. 1442 to 1492. That is roughly 50 years. Yes, it says the first 50 years saw the trade almost solely from Senegambia to Portugal, Seville, and other ports in Spain and Portugal. The second date, 1492 to 1575. The Spanish arrival in the New World under Columbus saw the beginning of a change. In this era, the trade in enslaved persons remained quite low, as Europeans were more interested in gold. By this time, the slave trade was not so strong. No much influence on it yet. because there was a crave, and the crave, so there was still a craving for gold, not for slaves at that time. Most Africans going to the New World came from Senegambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, often via the Cape Verde Islands, which were a Portuguese colony already. So Cape Verde was already a Portuguese colony, and they were passing through the island to go to those places. There was a growing trade from ports of Congo and Angola, mainly to the sugar plantations, which had been founded on the island of Sao Tome. Let's continue. Okay, now we have our questions. Let's look at it. It says, the first stage of the triangular slave trade witnessed goods being brought to West Africa from Dash. Please, the triangular trade we're talking about is the transatlantic slave trade. Please, don't forget. The answer is C, Caribbeans. Let's continue. The rapid growth of the transatlantic slave trade in West Africa was as a result of Dash. What led to the rapid growth of the transatlantic slave trade? Let's see the answer. The availability of able-bodied population in the region. So your answer is C. The abolition of the transatlantic slave trade was successful because of the Dash. What is the answer? The answer, let's see. Enforcement of international treaties, not necessarily the introduction of legitimate trade, no. There was an anti-slavery abolition act and all that. So international treaties and fines were going on. So if you do not put a stop to slave trade, you will have to face the wrath of the law. So these are one of the reasons, the enforcement of international treaties. The judgment which mainly impacted the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade was Dash. Was our answer. D, Lord Mansfield's decision of 1772. So please, I would like you to read up on this. Read up on this on your own. Which of the following factors supported the opposition to the suppression of the transatlantic slave trade? Let's see. Sources of wealth. So, you see, sources of wealth for many people. One thing you need to understand, when the abolition of the acts, laws, parliaments were meeting to put a stop to to abolish the slave trade, one of the things slave owners were not happy about is because it served as a source of wealth to them. They didn't want it to end because they were making so much money. They were making so much money, even when they were told that it was against humanity. So please take note. So A is your answer.